beautiful SO.
It probably has very healthy
Beautiful SO.
It probably has very healthy.
You could download for Trail of Linux. So we will be installing Arch Linux on real hardware, and in fact, this is the exact machine right here. We'll be it's down here on the map, and I'll just click on a random one. But I'm not going to download it because I've already done that. But the file you're looking for will end in a .iso extension like the one you see right here. The file name will change over time. You can see that the file name is based on the date, so this particular ISO image was created on the 1st of January. However, that's okay because they're always creating new installation media, but you'll just download whatever one is the most current, even if it's different than the one that I'm downloading right now. Once you have it downloaded, what you'll do is use it to create bootable installation media for Arch Linux by writing the ISO to the GPU. So what this tells me is, all right, let's go ahead and continue with a. Next, what we'll do is install the grub bootloader that's going to allow us to boot our system in the first place. To do that, we'll type grub-install --target. We are going to set that equal to x86_64, then -EFI. EFI is in lowercase this time. --bootloader -ID grub_uefi --recheck. So just take a moment and make sure that you've entered the command exactly as I have it here, and we'll press enter. And it's installed. No error reported. We should be good to go. Now we're almost done, but we have a few things left that we'll need to do. We're going to copy a file into our boot directory, and that's user share locale
margins, so good business to build. It's not very hard to build, especially because you don't have to write the underlying image model. There are very good image models available. You just need to train your face on them and let users generate images. The PMF of this has mostly been people creating Instagram photos, Tinder photos, Valentine photos, couple photos, things like these. The harder bits are number one, of course, selling it, and number two, creating a bunch of good prompts that generate images, creating a bunch of packs, for example, a Tinder pack, a Valentine Day pack that people can just, click on and see 1,000 pretty images of themselves. I think people don't need to worry about the underlying model or what a prompt is. People are dumb and they just want to come to a platform, click a photo, and then, have 100 variations of that photo generated for them. The tech stack that we've used is Node.js for the backend, Next.js for the front end, Clerk for authentication. We're using something called Fal AI to outsource hosting the model for now. But eventually, if you want to build this as a business, it's not the worst idea to self-host and squeeze some margins in there. Is there anything else? Postgres for the database, Prisma is the ORM, Bun more technically, not Node.js in the backend. DigitalOcean for deployment, a simple VM, and the platform is hosted on photo.100xdevs.com. We don't have Razorpay, so anyone can come and train their models and generate images, which is not great because I'll have to pay for everyone's image generation. So eventually the idea is to add payments in here. I'm opening a bounty, code is open source. So if you can add like a Razorpay or a Stripe integration, maybe both of them, one for India, one for US, create like a subscriptions page, that would be great. That'll be like some $100 of a bounty. And then another thing was a redesign. So I have a decentish design, I say. We have ShadCN and Tailwind. But if you think you're a decent designer, would love to, have you rebuild the UI from scratch and, maybe the UX as well. That's pretty much it. I don't think there's anything left. There aren't any prerequisites. You don't need to know ML, even though it's good for you to understand, what are weights and what are tensors and how does Flux work. But you don't really need it for this specific video. And other than that, that's pretty much it. Hope you like the video, and it's a slightly long video. The first half is me writing the backend. That part I'm explaining fairly well because I'm going slow. But then there is 3 hours of front end web and what are tensors and how does flux work, but you don't really need it for this specific video. And other than that, that's pretty much it. Hope you like the video, and it's a slightly long video. The first half is me writing the backend. That part I'm explaining fairly well. But I'm just coding. It was very late and I was very sleepy. So like fair warning there ke hopefully the front end is not too hard for you to just read through and understand. But while I was writing the front end, I was half asleep and coding it. So I'm not explaining it really well. Then I've run the deployment. I'm explaining that well, and then this will generate the image. It usually takes 5 to 20 seconds, and this will again hit our backend on a webhook whenever the training is done. We'll update the status in the database. Meanwhile, the user will keep on polling. Okay, has this image been generated? The image that I tried to generate a few seconds ago, has this been generated? If the status of the database is yes, we'll return a good status code. If the status of the database is it is still training, if file AI hasn't yet hit our backend, then the user will keep polling and we'll keep telling them image not generated, image not generated, image not generated. Whenever it generates, we let the user know this is the image. We update it on the front end right here. This is the image one, this is the image two. Simple enough. You can over-engineer this a lot, considering there are two systems talking to each other, and whenever there are webhooks, there are ways to optimize this even further. Let me talk about it for like 10 seconds. Okay, when a webhook is being hit to you, it's a good idea to not process that request immediately. It's a good idea to dump that request somewhere and then eventually process it, because if this process is extremely expensive, then you might get the webhook response. You might tell them, okay, I'm done, but your expensive process might fail over here. That's not the case for us, so we don't have to over-engineer. But ye part nahi samajh aaya to ignore. We can over-engineer this even further if we want, but we don't have to. This is more than enough for building an MVP like this and scaling it very easily to 100K. 100K a month is how many users? I don't know, 2,000 users? Yeah, that's no, 5,000 users. For a $50 plan, it's 2,000 users. Sorry. So you can easily handle the traffic of 2,000 users in an architecture like this. In fact, this is probably over-engineered for 2,000 users a month. You don't need as heavy of an asynchronous architecture. More technically, you don't need the Redis bit that I added, but we go with it and it's fine. We'll over-engineer this a little bit. In the process, learn something. Cool. Those are the two heavy endpoints. All the other endpoints are simple CRUDs. Find something from a database, return. This one will probably get tricky. We'll reach there when we reach there. But whenever you're clicking on a pack, you're probably pretty much sending like 10 requests to generate an image. So it shouldn't be too difficult to build this one either, or, nothing too complicated is going to come over here. And getting a pack is again, a simple CRUD request. Cool. Can we get into the coding bit? Hopefully simple enough and, shouldn't take us more than 3 hours. Probably, I would assume 2 hours on the front end and maybe 1.5 hours on the back end. Let's start by building the back end first, and then we'll get into the front end later. All right, let's get into the coding bit next. I'm going to use a Turbo repo and create Turbo at the rate of latest. Hopefully you guys understand what Turbo repos are by now. It's basically a single repository which has all of our code bases and slightly optimized build pipelines. We'll come to what build pipelines are if you don't understand this part. I'm going to call it image generation platform. And here we're selecting bun. I'm almost predicting this is going to give us a bunch of issues because clearly it says bun beta over here first. And secondly, I know it has some issues with Next.js. I also don't know how to start projects and, I have muscle memory of using npm, npm. So as we progress through this, we'll see if npm and some issue image. All right, let's get into the coding bit next. I'm going to use a Turbo repo and create Turbo at the rate of latest. Hopefully you guys understand what Turbo repos are by now. It's basically a single repository which has all of our code bases and slightly optimized build pipelines. We'll come to what build pipelines are if you don't understand this part. I'm going to call it image generation platform. ये माइक उठता रहता है बार। There we go. Good mic. Hello, hello. How's everyone doing? Someone sent me some code which has a bunch of doubts. Let's see. Loading. What is this Notion? What's Coda.io? This is a new Notion alternative platform. This thing tells me to give us a bunch of issues because clearly it says one beta over here first. Why is that? Secondly, I know it has some issues with Next.js. I also don't know how to start projects, and I have muscle memory of using npm and pnpm. Every route is being handled by it. It's telling you. Progress through this route valid नहीं है. See if you auth slash API slash auth slash.
It's lagging. He will join in a minute, guys. Wait for a minute or two.
Guys, there is a internet connection issue on Kirat's side.
Hello, Bing.
Just hold,
Yeah,
he'll
no
be
worries.
there in a minute.
The internet might be a little wonky today. So if that happens, just wait for me to join back. All right. Your actionable Docker video, Ankur, has that not been put yet? Let me see. DevOps.
That was up, but there's some issue. It needs to be put in herkira.classx as well. It will be done tonight.
Got it. It's already here, वैसे. advantageaccess.com. End में I discussed actionable DevOps. But still, if you go to the end, so it's basically you'll be fine. But if you stay towards the beginning, it'll be a little hard. All right, we'll start in another minute. Let me look at a few more chats here. Projects, format of messages, resolve issues on advantage.com. What is the issue that's left here? Any specific issue, just let me know later. Next, Notion docs, a lot of Notion docs. All right, we will start. And at the end, I'll take more questions. I'll try to wrap it up in 1.5 hours. I don't think we need too much of too many hours today. This is not a incredibly tough concept. Sorry, I'm on chat for everyone. I wanted to chat with everyone. These are the slides for today. Today we're covering monorepos and specifically something called turbo repo. So not very important concepts initially in your career or even dev journey if you join a company. But if you join a mid-sized company, today to even startups, if you look at most startups, if they're writing elegant code, they are using monorepos. That's one of the reasons you might get overwhelmed if you ever open the code of, let's say, dub.sh, because it doesn't look like a Next.js application. It has a bunch of files and folders, a bunch of things over here, a package.json in the root folder. If you go to apps/web, there is another package.json over here. If you go to packages/ anything, let's say UI, you will see another package.json over here. So what is this weird way of structuring applications that's sort of become the norm now is what we're going to discuss. The norm today, by norm, I mean most places you will find turbo repo. Some places still use other monorepo frameworks. For example, Lerna is a famous one that we used back at Gather, but Gather was also actively moving away from it. So long story short, there are many monorepo frameworks. The name is sort of giving what a monorepo framework is: a single repository where multiple packages are present. Your front-end code is present, your back-end code is present. This is a very heavy debate that you might have in a company. Okay, should we have different repositories on GitHub for front-end, for back-end, for DevOps, or should we have the same repository? There are good and bad answers here. I have not worked at Meta, but I think even the Meta code base from a few people that have worked here have told me is a single code base, a single repository that has everything. That comes with a bunch of challenges. The biggest challenge being when you're cloning the repository, you get the full code base of Meta, or in this case, the full code base of dub.sh, even if you want to work on just the front end. The build times become really high. If you're ever testing a change, it might not work on your machine, or it takes a really long time. If you're trying to set it up, you might require backend ki jo, packages hai, even though you're not working on backend, you're only working on front end. So there are a lot of challenges in putting all of your code in a single repository, but it is preferred for many reasons. Biggest one being, the setup happens like this. If all the code is in a single place, your developers, if a new developer joins, they just have to run one command usually, which is a Docker command, to be able to start everything in one go. That includes the backend, the front end, the database, any other auxiliary microservice that you might have. That's the benefit. And so downsides hai, they have sort of also been controlled. You can control how often your build happens. For example, another downside of using a monorepo framework is, okay, whenever there is a new commit here, we might redeploy to both front end and to backend. Okay, a new code base has been pushed over here. We will deploy it to our servers. But it might happen that backend to change. Why not? In this specific commit, let's say, only the front end was changed and the backend was not changed. So that is another downside that you might think happens, but there are ways to control it. You can write your CI/CD pipeline. What is a CI/CD pipeline? You will get to. But basically, this tick that you see over here, sometimes these pipelines are deploying your code to production on every commit. Whenever a commit happens over here, your code reaches your server, it gets deployed to your end users. So another downside that people state is, if I make a small change in front end, everything will redeploy because the CI/CD pipeline will think the backend has changed also, even though only the front end has changed. But you can write your CI/CD pipelines a little smart way to make sure if front end is changed, front end redeploys, backend is changed, backend redeploys. So these are the pros and cons of using a monorepo or a monorepo framework. To recap, what is a monorepo? As the name suggests, a single repository, a single code base that holds all of your front end, back end, DevOps, other microservices, everything that your website needs to start is present in a single repository. That is what a monorepo is. A few good examples are Daily Code is a monorepo, cal.com is a monorepo. And notice in both of them, there is something very common. In both of them, apps is a folder, packages is a folder. If you go to cal.com, apps is a folder, packages is a folder. If you go to dub.sh, internet being a little wonky, but apps is a folder, packages is a folder. So most repositories have a very common folder structure. Where is the folder structure coming from? That is what we'll understand today. If you get a sense of this, next time you're seeing a repository that has an apps folder and a packages folder, you'll get less overwhelmed because you will understand what exactly is happening over here. Do you need to know them very well as a full folder? And we'll understand today. Have a very common folder structure. Where is the folder structure coming from? That is what we'll understand today. If you get a sense of this, next time you're seeing a repository that has an apps folder and a packages folder, you'll get less overwhelmed because you will understand what exactly is happening over here. Do you need to know them very well as a full stack engineer? Yes and no. Today, if I open dub.sh code base and I ask you to explore it, some of you might be able to figure your way around it. You don't need to know it explicitly. Because a lot of times if you join a mid-sized startup or a big company or whatever, it's already set up. These monorepos are set up. These packages are set up. Rarely do you have to change this folder structure. You are just making code changes in the right place. For example, if you join dub.sh tomorrow, so even though the folder structure is highly overwhelming, you will explore karte reach the apps/web folder. And you will see that this looks like a simple Next.js application. And you will start to contribute to this as a Next.js application. You will not worry about packages mein kya ho raha hai until you need to. So you don't need to know it. Usually not the DevOps guy, some serial engineer, some person who's starting the code base will take care of setting it up. But it's a good idea to know how you can migrate to a monorepo. For example, daily code was originally made in a live, which was not a monorepo. And then eventually we had to convert it into a monorepo. So how do you take steps like these? If you ever join a company and want to convert their code base into a monorepo, how would you do that is what we'll discuss today. With that, let's get right into it. This is the context for today. We'll understand monorepos and we'll understand what is turbo repo. It's very nuanced difference between both of them. Turbo repo is not a monorepo framework. I repeat, turbo repo, the thing that we're learning today, is actually not a monorepo framework, which was something even I learned very late. I assumed it to be another monorepo framework. So we'll understand what is a monorepo framework. We'll understand what is turbo repo, what is the difference between them, and why do people prefer using turbo repo in most of the code bases that you see on screen. With that, we'll get into why monorepos. Very simple answer. Even before the answer, a simple question, okay, why can't I simply put various folders in my code base? Why do you need a monorepo framework? It feels very obvious. Monorepo, okay, in a single repository, I will put my backend code, I will put my DevOps code, I will push it, I will create 3 folders, front-end, backend, DevOps. I will push them. And that's my monorepo. Why are we even discussing this, Harkirat? ठीक है, एक कोड बेस को एक सिंगल रिपोजिटरी में डालना है, हम डाल देंगे. We can put front end, back end, and everything in a single code base. Why do you need such a weird looking folder structure? What exactly does turbo repo provide you? And the answer is, okay, question is, why can't I just store various top level folders? The answer is, if you can, you should. If your services are highly decoupled, if your front end code doesn't need to share anything with your backend code, if your front end code is in React and your backend code is in Rust, then put them in separate folders and push it. In fact, even let them be separate repositories, that is fine. When services don't depend on each other, if the front-end code is not dependent on back-end code, or front-end and back-end are both not dependent on some common code base, they're completely disjoint, does not matter. Put them in 2 separate folders, push them up, ban gayi tumhari monorepo. The reason or the case where you need a monorepo framework is not when you have code bases like this. Okay, you have a Node.js backend and a Golang backend, and you deploy both of them in separate folders. That is fine. That is how you should do it. You don't need a monorepo framework here. You need monorepos when there is, number 1, shared code reuse. If you are creating a project where there is a React frontend and a Node.js backend, but both of them have to share some data. You have some React code, you have some Node.js code, but there is some common function in both of them. Let's say function sum. Hope you guys can still hear me. So since the sum function ki implementation is the same, we can avoid code duplication and move it to a single common module. And the React project can use this common module. The Node project can use this common module. That is how you can structure your code a little bit better. If multiple projects have some shareable code, a good example of this is Zod types. If you remember, we write a lot of Zod types. We've written them in the past. For example, user sign up type, user sign in type. If you remember what was Zod schemas, we used to write a lot of them in the backend. But if you also remember, you can infer types from these Zod schemas. If you don't understand that, that's fine. My point is that this code also was a highly reusable code between front end and backend that you can put into a common module, and you shouldn't store, independently in 2 different places.